Red Hat OpenShift is the sponsor for our container platform coverage from OSCON in Austin, Texas. OpenShift reaches across open source communities to collaborate for healthy upstream development. The goal? Ensure the support for features and functionalities that end users require across the overall ecosystem. You can learn more at openshift.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at OSCON. It is Container Day here, and we are discussing container platforms during the day. But right now, we're going to talk about another very important matter that relates really to diversity in open source. And so I'm here with Diane Mueller of Red Hat, and Diane's really going to lead this conversation. And so, Diane, why don't you introduce our guests?
All right. Well, I'm really pleased to have Jessica Rose from DreamFactory and Daniel Izquierdo. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Izquierdo from Bitergia. See, I'll get it right eventually. Because both of them are here at OSCON with us and have brought some really interesting perspectives around diversity and have some interesting facts and figures. And one of the things, I met Daniel a long time ago drilling down on community metrics and helping us at OpenShift uncover through our mailing lists and all of our different forums how to quantify who's actually contributing to our projects. And at OpenStack Summit a while back, Daniel did some work diving down on the gender diversity in the OpenStack technical contributions. And so, community, especially if you know me, is about much more than just the code and the contribution. But it was really kind of an eye-opener to see some of the stats that you guys came up with. Can you talk a little bit about, Daniel, how that project came about and what you found?
Yeah, all of this started during the Tokyo Summit, so was the previous one in November 2015, and that was kind of informal conversation with Nitya Raff. She's working in SanDisk, and she's part of the Women of OpenStack working group. This working group claimed that there was kind of an 11% of female attendees to that summit, and they received a tweet, and the tweet was asking, okay, how many of them are actually doing technical contributions? So this is where all these stories started about.
Yeah. And it was great because I'm older than dirt, and I went to university back in the 80s, and I went, back in the 80s. You're older than dirt too, Alex. That's good.
In the 80s? I was born in 82, so...
Yeah, there you go.
I was born in 80, mumble. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're, I was graduating from college right around there, and I went to the University of Massachusetts, and there were 350 kids in my computer science program, and 3 of them at the time were women.
Oh.
And it's actually fairly shocking because those numbers haven't gotten any better. Like if you look, maybe not in that specific classroom, but overall, the number of women sort of in computer science programs or in the industry have continued to go down.
But I think like in communities like OpenStack, and I came up through the Python community and the Django community, and they're really, amazing places to, that have figured out how to be much more inclusive. And I think that's, one of the wonderful things about some of the stuff that goes on in open source. There's some not so great stuff too, which we don't need to get into. But what I think the numbers that we saw around code contributions, it was around 10.6% of the code contributions to OpenStack back in Tokyo were women, which was, kind of got to that 11% that everybody was kind of thinking about. So that was kind of cool to see that.
At the very beginning of the project, it was around 6%. So they were around 10% of the population, and they were doing kind of 6% of the total activity. Now it has increased something like 11% and 11% of activity.
I'd be really interested to hear a bit about sort of how you got those numbers out of the community. I think going in, communities are these sort of big, humans are marvelous, but humans don't always scale very well. Mm-hmm. So approaching one person and asking them for that kind of detail.
But it's kind of sensitive information.
Yeah.
That's in first place. And we are talking about 10,000 different identities that we were analyzing here and retrieving information. So all of the magic comes from the first name of each of the individuals. So what we did was, okay, let's try this approach. Let's go for this. And there's an API around named genderize.io. So you can give them a name, and they returns with a probability that this name is female or male. So this is where we all, and then a lot of coffee, and then some manual validation, a lot of manual validation.
But I don't want to give people the impression that it's all about a number. Because I think we all have had conversations in different groups that we've been where there's a team of evangelists or engineers, and somebody says, "Oh, well, you don't have any women. Let's hire a woman," or "You don't have any people of color. Let's make sure we bring some in," which is all well and good and usually well intentioned, but it is really not the most supportive way to bring people in, just to fill in a number. So I think.
Yeah, I think it gets really challenging because I think everybody's seen it in technology, teams or communities. You'll see a community or a team grow to a specific size, and then either people within the company or people within the community start asking themselves, in a perfect world, they start asking themselves, where's the diversity? But very often I think I see projects or teams ask themselves, oh dear, are we going to get in trouble for the lack of diversity in our team? And I think there's often some sort of less well-intentioned. So, let's get someone in so we don't get fussed out. And I think that asking the very genuine question, hey, this is what our network looks like. This is what the people building this look like. How did this happen? Would be a lot more productive. I mean,
How did this happen?
Yeah. How did we wind up with people who sort of are all from the similar background? How did we wind up with this lack of diversity?
How do we drop 5%, right, from like the, in terms of actual people, actual women who contribute, or like looking at the dynamics more so than anything?
Yeah, I think on a very basic human level, it's so much easier for us to find value in people that reflect our own values. So we like people who are like us. It's very lazy. It's a very lazy way that sort of mammals find friends. So I'm really cautious to sort of call people out to say, hey, you've got a community, a small project of maybe 20, 30 people, and there's no diversity. I wonder how much of that's just people replicating networks in sort of a very lazy mammal sort of way.
The other thing that people have come to realize is that diversity makes for better, more innovative groups, for different approaches working on a project to have different points of view. And I'm sure there's some Stanford study that I read somewhere that backs me up on this one. But one of the things I think a lot of, especially open source projects that come from things like Python or Django or other projects. I really love those guys. The Node community sometimes does some good stuff too, and lots of other communities do. But when people recognize that those diverse opinions are of value to make a better product, move the project ahead, I think that's where, rather than saying let's fill in the gap here,
And that's something that's absolutely staggering to me. Like, empirically, we know that a diverse range of perspectives is more valuable. We know that diverse startups make more money. We know that diverse teams ship more code. We know that diverse projects last longer. Every single research study has shown that the more diversity you have on a team that is well supported, the better outcomes you get in health of the community, the better outcomes you get in open source. I think a lot of times we like to think that we do it because we love the code, which is true, and because we love the community, but it's still a business ecosystem in many ways. And just being able to say to people, if you were better at this, you would make more money. The failure to believe that and take that on board is kind of confusing to me.
So what do you see as these, what is your vision of, or the view of like how organizations, how the good ones are actually doing this, right? So, and I try to like trace it back to what is just using our name, what is a new stack organization, right? And for us, it's more like an inside-outside kind of an organization, right? Where it's like you may have an internal engineering group, but you're working with an open source community, right? So it's like you have an inside group and an outside group in many ways, right? And this is increasingly the way we think of how we work all the time. Like we use Twitter or we use Slack, and Slack can be both an internal tool and an external tool, right? So I'm curious, what are some of your thoughts on the models that, and is it this, what is that behavioral patterns that we're starting to see that actually show us a change, or is there not one at all?
That's, oh dear, everyone's looking at me. It's really difficult because I'm not sure there are some projects doing really great jobs and really experimental things, and I think that looking at internal and external, a lot of it comes down to building the kind of teams that you want to see reflected in your communities.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking because you were talking beforehand about this sweet spot that we have in our brain.
Oh yeah, so
and I was thinking that, okay, so what is that sweet spot that gets us to these points where we can actually be accustomed to these new behaviors?
So what, I'll talk to the video for a second, the podcast folks. What we were talking about before we started recording is a linguistics concept called the zone of proximal development, saying that if you're working on tasks either in language learning or I suppose in programming that are too easy, you don't get real learning done. And if you're working on tasks that are too difficult, no real learning happens. There's this sweet spot where you need to be to sort of make real things happen. I think that's true in almost everything in life, and I think looking for that sweet spot in sort of harmony and openness in communities is really, really challenging.
Yeah, it is. Harmony keeps coming up.
Yeah, the other thing, like last night in the Ignite talks, one of the gentlemen was talking about how to lend your privilege. I thought that was a great concept, and I hadn't heard that. I mean, I'd heard of it, but he just articulated it very nice. And one of the examples he gave was when you're in a team, giving a space for someone to have a voice, or giving them access to expertise, and how to take those kinds of actions that will help to build a more bring in people of diverse points of view and diverse origins, and try and make them have the opportunities, because it's really giving people the opportunities to participate and be recognized for their expertise. It's not that you have to make experts out of them. Sometimes what you need to do is make space for their voices to be in the conversation.
Yeah, I think the idea that we don't have the diverse talent in our... Am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
Wicked.
Profusely.
I think this idea that, we just don't have enough talent, diverse talent to represent in this community or in this company is absolutely bullshit. So we have incredible amounts of talent. And the thing is, that isn't necessarily very easy for the larger community and larger industry to recognize. So you get senior people of color drop out year after year, drop out of technology and move into different industries. You see women, really well recorded, an amazing rate of women drop out of the industry. You have these senior voices who've been doing things for ages. I think giving them, stopping and taking a better look, like us assessing skill better and us assessing expertise better and rewarding that in sort of a real meritocratic system, I think would be a really great first step. And recognize skill better, pay people better, give them better jobs and better visibility. It'll take 20 minutes, it'll be fine.
One of the things that would be really interesting to see is, and I work at Red Hat, and we have a very open and transparent organization, and we even wrote a book about it, our CEO did, called the Open Org. But I think one of the things that transparency and pay, being able to to actually see what your counterparts are making, and those sorts of actions that will level the playing field in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of and that brings you kind of back to some of the metrics and the measurement stuff. Is like it's great to see code contribution, but normally a lot of, especially in open source projects these days, those code contributors are paid people from companies.
Well, that depends on the communities. But
yeah, it is too. But it's an interesting. It would be interesting to do another twist on these numbers to see how many of them were working on projects for their employers versus those who came in independently, because the independent ones are probably self-funding their interest or their work in there. And there's this whole dynamic of where the money comes from for an open source project that influences the direction and even the culture inside of a project.
Mm-hmm. Well, in part of this analysis, I also I had a look at the numbers of the outreach projects for the OpenStack Summit. I found that they are having a worse retention rate than if for big companies like Red Hat and others. Well, in the end, developers are being paid by these big companies, right? But they are still doing a good job. And one of the main developers that are now part of the OpenStack Foundation, they were, let's say, hired during this outreach project, which is also some good news.
Outreachy stuff is really an amazing project. There are a lot of great little and amazing projects to bring diversity into the project. And OpenStack has actually done a lot of really great work, and Outreachy is another one. And
I'm from an education background and absolutely into sort of adult technical education programs and love Rails Girls Summer of Code more than almost anything. Yeah.
This is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, like, I live in a real rural community and do a lot of technical evangelism to in the school systems for the Native education colleges there, for the First Nations groups. There's lots of ways we can give back, and it's very empowering. And you don't realize how much you get when you give it back. And I think that's one of the things in the open source world, and at OSCON you'll see like lots of the nonprofits here are folks that are, and they are sponsored by some of the biggest vendors on the planet that are also sponsors of OSCON. So there's this sort of giving culture that's helping, but there's still a little bit of a long way to go.
So I'm curious about, in comparison to other groups inside of an organization, finance and marketing and sales and operations, and what's the comparison?
Yeah, that's a touchy subject because you know what happens, like what I've seen, and this is Diane's humble opinion, and everybody in marketing hates me when I say this, is that you'll see in HR and marketing many more women, because and their expertise as technical experts gets brought, by the engineers or stuff. If you're not an engineer and you're not working on the code, you couldn't be a brilliant person. And but what happens is, because of the culture in the tech engineering groups, women they can get the same pay for doing a job in HR or marketing or finance.
I don't think they often get the same pay.
Probably not the same pay. Okay, I'll take that one back.
I was going to say the
generally across the board, it's pretty well recognized that the pay is less.
Well, I mean, like technical versus non-technical roles, the pay gap is
pretty big.
Is massive, and often makes me pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah, but you'll see that. I mean, you'll see brilliant women engineers go and move, and it's awesome to work with them when they're on the technical marketing team, because they have these, they actually get what you're talking about. Yeah. But you kind of feel bad that okay, well they weren't able to maybe they wanted to do that, but I just
Do you know what absolutely makes me shake with rage is when you get roles that have essentially the same function, or 80-90% of the same function.
What they call marketing.
And you get sort of not necessarily. Well, I don't want to say. I'm going to say gender. You get sort of gendered takes on different job titles. So marketing. So you'll get community managers. I see women so represented in community management, and then you'll see developer relations over here, where I see so much overlap between these two roles, and I see incredibly technical community managers, and the salary spread is very different, and it's often very frustrating.
Yeah.
So we'd love to see these metric numbers done with salaries too. If we could talk about getting personal, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, I don't have access to those numbers, but I was talking to some guys on the foundation, on the OpenStack Foundation, and or at least what they can provide if we have some kind of agreement with them is that we can go for further analysis and not only focus on gender. So we can go to diversity in a broader sense. Yeah.
If I can brag for a second, because I'm quite proud. It's an experiment, so I'm still waiting to see how it'll happen. So we've just hired out our developer relations team. So there's only the three of us, but there's two women working with me, and all of us have a flat salary. So although I'm managing the team, they all make the exact same as I do, regardless of location, regardless of what they were doing beforehand, just to eliminate bias in hiring. I'm interested to see how that works. I really believe it's going to end well, so I'm cautiously optimistic.
being in Canada and having most of my colleagues down in the States, and the currency discrepancies that, when my salary dips down and someone says that Vancouver is, a less expensive place to live than, say, Seattle or other places, I just they haven't been to Vancouver. Don't go there. Don't have that conversation with me. Because it's like this, we have this myth of, you should get paid more or less based on your location. It really is about where you work, what the work is that you do, as opposed to that, and that's another boogaboo. We could have another hour-long conversation.
If we could just, I'll get you, and we'll start our own podcast, and we'll just fuss and fuss and fuss.
Please do.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
This is also a number of, this is a matter of salary, but this is also a matter of numbers. Because also in this study, what I did was looking around, Googling internet, and I retrieved some numbers from Pinterest and Google and some other big companies, and all of their numbers, they were claiming that the workforce for females in their companies were around 30%, 30-something. Well, this is what they said. This is public on the internet. And in the tech working groups that they had, they were around between a 10 and a 20%. And if we go back for the numbers of the OpenStack, they are around an 11% of the population, even when probably a 90% of the people working in OpenStack are being paid. So, hey, there's a difference here between this 10% and a 20% that the big companies are claiming.
Well, I think that's part of, you don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Probably you're right.
So, and it's also like, again, what are the roles are they playing in that company too, to break it down in that. I think that's, if you're including everybody from, each part of each contingent, whether it's infrastructure services,
Yeah, they were only saying, they specified that was the tech team, that's all.
But everything at Google is tech.
Yeah, probably is.
And I think that's a big thing when you're talking about look at what people's positions are. So when I was looking for my last role, I wanted to find some place where I felt that people would be listening to my opinion and they would value it and I wouldn't be talked over. So coming into a company that had women in meaningful positions of power with a fun open source project, it was just like, oh yes, I would like this job now.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Well, and that's like one of the wonderful things about Red Hat is that there are so many open source projects and there are lots of women in all kinds of senior management positions. So, when you see yourself reflected in the other positions in the company, you are more likely to want to be there, and you welcome in the conversation. And that I think is like, having come out of the 80s and not seeing yourself reflected in the conversation or in the room was a big issue for me. So you had to put yourself out there. I think that might be, I might be an introvert, but you would never know that, right? So
you fake it pretty well.
Yeah, I fake introversion very well.
And I think it gets difficult on some stage because saying like, oh, we need to do better with gender, it sounds like it should be an easy problem, but we're doing a terrible job. But we've already got this job that we should be able to solve and we're doing a bad job at. But I think at the end of the day, diversity, while we're trying to solve this thing we haven't fixed yet, needs to continue to be larger. So for me, gender is really, really an easy one to point to. Clearly not an easy one to fix, but saying, we need to do better at supporting people of color. We need to be better at supporting LGBT folks in the industry. Neurodiversity. So the BBC is doing a really great thing with the Coral Project. It's so cool. If anybody is listening or watching and wants to Google it, there was just a talk at WordCamp London about the Coral Project, which was brilliant, around neurodiversity and working technology. And I think it lets people, like, looking at a wider range of what diversity means, should ideally let people opt in. So say, hey, we are talking about these people and they're not you, and we're not talking about these people and they're not you. Is this you? Okay. But also talking about things like age in an industry that worships youth. To say like, okay, none of these are you, but I hope you're planning to get old.
That's one thing that's pretty much inevitable. You will get old. So.
I talked to somebody yesterday who was born in 1997. They can drive.
Oh my God.
I have t-shirts older than that.
On that note. I brought 14-year-old with me who turned 15, who's manning the booth at OSCON. So I'm going in to get them as young as possible and bring them in. So I think it's also, bringing, getting youth involved, but also making sure that we bring in, we retain our senior folks, because there are a lot of people just leaving.
And the thing is, I don't think that we're ever going to fix people leaving tech, but I'd like to see people leaving on their own terms. I'd like to see them leaving to become veterinarians or start yoga studios or to paint. I'd not like to see people leaving burnt out and unhappy.
Well, great. Well, this has been a terrific conversation. So thank you all very much for joining us, at the new stack here at OSCON, and thanks to Red Hat for making this possible.
Happy to be here.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Bye-bye. Red Hat OpenShift is the sponsor for our container platform coverage from OSCON in Austin, Texas. OpenShift reaches across open source communities to collaborate for healthy upstream development. The goal? Ensure the support for features and functionalities that end users require across the overall ecosystem. You can learn more at openshift.com.